Hey there, and howdy, everybody, and welcome to this Retro Repair Roundup, episode number, I don't know what it is, 74 now or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Apparently, we actually decided to wear our hats tonight. Javier got his real quick before the show started, so I decided to not be one-upped or whatever, and now I'm going to take it off because it's itchy.
Yeah,
Housekeeping as always before we get dug into the show tonight. Thank you all for stopping by to watch the show. We know you have a lot of things you could be doing on a Sunday night, but we know you're on Nerds and you like to hang out with us, so it's really cool that you're here. We have a lot of people here hanging out. One Bit Fever Dreams and Dave and Rudy. One Bit Fever Dreams, by the way, is another Macintosh game developer, so cool stuff there. Rudy is Sloopy. 80386, Everything's Broken Garage, CDI Mark Ending, Mac 84, the name it on YouTube there. Jeremy's Vintage Apple Tech, Garth Beagle, who for some reason loves the silly little song that I created in GarageBand for our show. Sure, why not? Scrolling. I'm sure there are other people in the back. Francois is there. Yes. Hello, Francois. Jack68K. So, again, thank you all for stopping by tonight. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and after the show, leave some comments in the comment section underneath the video. That helps YouTube do YouTube algorithm things or something. Yeah. I don't know. So,
it optimizes all the search engines again.
Yeah, it does AI things that make it hallucinate more. I don't know.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So, yes. So, tonight, we have our wonderful and awesome guest, John Calhoun. You may know John Calhoun. I guarantee you know John Calhoun. Mm-hmm. If you were a kid in the 1980s and 90s and played games on the Mac, you played this guy's games. Glypha Glider and a whole bunch of other stuff. So, welcome, John, to our show. How are you doing tonight, sir?
I'm good. I'm in Omaha, Nebraska.
Ooh.
I'm still in the Midwest.
Yeah.
I grew up in Kansas City, but went to California for 20 some odd years to work for a job, and then retired and decided to move back to the Midwest. My wife's from Omaha. And it was kind of a toss-up, Kansas City or Omaha, and I went ahead and came to Omaha. So she's got family here. My family's all from.
Yeah. Plus, go Huskers, right?
Yeah, I guess.
So let me ask you this: as a now a naturalized Nebraskan, what do you think of the whole thing of them having cinnamon rolls with chili?
I don't know anything about. I've heard about that and how crazy that is. And
having grown up in Illinois, like you go to school lunch and stuff, they would give you, if you had chili, they would give you like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Yeah. Or there's other places they would give you like grilled cheese or whatever. And I have some friends that are from Nebraska, and when they brought that up, I was like, it's dessert with your chili. Whatever.
Yeah, when my daughter and her boyfriend were out here and they were talking about that, they went ahead and had to try it, and they were surprised at how good the two were together. Thought they would just get the cinnamon roll, the chili, eat them separate, mix them up, and say, hey, you know what, this isn't so bad. So
it's Ron, like the weird Ohio thing of putting cinnamon in chili. It's like it's got to be some sort of thing. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Did I know that you were from Cape Girardeau, Ron?
You may have.
Is that where
I'm pretty sure it came up. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
So we were at the eclipse the year or so ago, and we ended up going to Jackson, Missouri.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
I was kind of about Cape Girardeau. I was kind of on the cuff, like, should we go to Cape Girardeau? And all I can think of, because I didn't know you were from Cape Girardeau, is your famous son. May he rest in peace.
I really thought that they were like, when he died, that people were gonna like make more of that than they did, and eventually all they said was, he really did a lot for AM radio.
Sure.
And that was it. but his family is they're lawyers in town and philanthropists, and
is that right?
Support like quite a bit of like scouting and kids sports and all that. So
we were
seemingly nice folks, but
we loved the kind of river towns along the Missouri and Mississippi. I mean, Kansas City is a river town. Omaha's a river town. They're on the Missouri. So I kind of wanted to do a road trip where we just kind of hit all the river towns. We were in Hannibal, Missouri a year ago, and we happened to be there on like Tom Sawyer Day or something. And that was great. The whole town was out, and there was all kinds of stuff going on.
I was gonna say you should come here because it's everything you like about Hannibal, but nobody wants to like talk to you about Huck Finn for like the rest of your natural life. Like we're just leaving it. We're leaving it to those other folks. But
we saw Becky Thatcher's house. Come on, man.
Oh yeah.
You went to the caves?
No, were there caves there?
Well, that's where they hide all the pirate,
I remember
the pirate
the
gold.
book, but I don't remember any signs for the caves.
Yeah.
So I'm 60 years old, 60. Am I the oldest one here?
Yes, you are.
I am 50 adjacent.
Okay. So the first computer I ever saw was a TRS-80, and it was running. I'm guessing Super Trek. It was the Star Trek kind of. I say command line, but it was kind of ASCII art, right? And that just blew my mind because it was like a simulator. And I'm like, oh my God, here's a computer and it's like you're Captain Kirk on the Enterprise, but it's all the good stuff, the good episodes where you're just wasting Klingons, I mean, I was 12 years old. So, but that kind of Trash 80 was like out of reach for me at that time. But let's see, I think when I was in junior in high school, they had a computer science class. It was just called computer science. And I went ahead and signed up for it. And then my junior year in high school, I walk into the class and the guy who's teaching it is the math teacher. And he just teaches this one computer science class. And he said, you guys are going to have to buy a brick of these punch cards. And we're going to learn something called Fortran. I'm like, okay. Even then, since I'd already seen like the TRS-80, I kind of had the sense that like this was sort of old school. And I thought, I was a little bummed out. But the next week we come into class and there's like 8 Apple II computers lined up in the classroom. And he says, okay, instead you need to get 2 of these 5 1/4 inch floppies. And we're going to learn a language called BASIC. And this math teacher, he was going to the junior college and taking a class on BASIC before, and then coming in and teaching us. And there were some of the kids in the class that were in his class at the junior college, like, hi, Mr. So-and-so. So that was kind of my sort of introduction to programming, was BASIC on an Apple II in 1980, 81, something like that. And so here's a trivia, interesting trivia bit. Do you know who went to my high school? About 8 years behind me, six to 8 years behind me. John Carmack.
Oh wow!
Oh, nice.
Same high school.
Oh wow!
But you know what? I went through some yearbooks and I didn't see him, and I don't know why. I don't know if it's because he was in trouble with the law at that time, or they pulled him out of school, or he may have been going to some gifted. They had something, can't remember what it was called, but it was kind of like where gifted kids would, go. And so maybe he was part of that and then just didn't get his photo in. But
is it possible he had combed all of his hair forward and you thought it was Cousin It?
I looked for his name. I wasn't looking for his photo.
Yeah.
But yeah, he went to the same high school. And I read one of the books, like, was it the book about Doom? I can't remember the name of it. And yeah, he'd like busted into some school and stolen a bunch of Apple IIs or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, who does that?
I think
him, apparently.
Dumb kids.
Yeah. Dumb kids. But I mean, that would never, that wouldn't have even occurred to me to try stealing Apple computer or something like that. Maybe he was hanging around with the wrong friends or something like that.
That's right. It was all those Amiga people. They put him up to it.
I believe that. I'm with you. Yeah.
But yeah, I'll tell you, I have to say, when I read that book, about the making of Doom, I kind of came away hating everybody, and hate's a strong word. Yeah, I don't know.
Having a strong dislike for kind of just a very cavalier bunch of people. But I guess that's kind of the break stuff mentality of a lot of that world, I guess, where it's just sort of like we're just doing things and it's disruptive and you know.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Did you want to ask any specific questions?
Yeah, we've got all kinds of questions, but this is good because we normally say just introduce yourself and kind of talk about whatever you want to talk about, and then we get into the formal thing. So
those are my roots. I should say, because it kind of comes up in various shades throughout. Is I was like my sister and I were like the poorest kids in school. I mean, my mom was cool enough that she got us into a good school district. But we were like, I think the only kids poorer than us there was one kid, and I swear to God, his mom was the lunch lady. Mm-hmm. And they got some kind of a deal where if she worked at the school, her kid could go to that high school. Yeah. I think that was like the only kid that was poorer than us. Mm-hmm. So, the idea of ever owning even a Commodore 64 or something like that was just, it just wasn't going to happen, So mm-hmm. That the school had Apple IIs, and that kind of goes to show you that, the school district was top notch. I just stay in after school, and try to write, Lunar Lander or something like that on the Apple II. But then I go home and, no machine. I did have a friend though, whose parents got a Commodore PET. And so I started going over to his house and after school, and we'd write programs that would generate NPCs for Dungeons and Dragons, that sort of thing. And then they would come out on his little, either daisy wheel or form feed, whatever kind of printer he had. And so then when we'd play D&D, we just you needed some NPCs, you just pulled them out. They'd been already pre-rolled, that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. But yeah, go ahead.
Cool. Yeah. Our first question that we have for you, sir, is what were some of your favorite games to play with as a youth? Or favorite games to play as a youth? And do you still like those same genres today? I believe that we mean video games.
Yeah, as you can tell, I mean, computer games, of course, would have been like I said, Star Trek on the TRS-80. But I didn't have it. I didn't own the machine. Mm-hmm. But I remember going in after school, and there were a couple of kids that were huge pirates, Apple II software pirates, and it was kind of this dick thing where first of all, I think they had enough money. They buy these games, and then if you wanted a game, you'd have to trade something. Well, shit, I didn't have anything to trade, but somehow I'd get I'd weasel somebody and talk them into giving me a copy of Death Maze 2000 or whatever it was. Then I'd have something that maybe I could trade for Microprose Flight Simulator 1 or something like that. And so I started playing those kinds of games. The Maze, was it called Death Maze? Does that sound right? Does this ring a bell? Does anybody know what this was?
I've heard of it before. I've never seen it though.
It was kind of a maze game that was sort of like your fake 3D, where you just see a hallway and you move through it. But it was a fun one, and then of course
Maze Wars, isn't it?
Huh?
Maze Wars?
Maybe no, it wasn't Maze Wars. Because you didn't fight. It wasn't network. You didn't fight.
Oh yeah, because we used to play.
It was more of a puzzle game, but. Okay. So yeah, I kind of got turned on to computer games in the arcade, and it was Defender and Asteroids and all of those games. Joust, of course, because I ended up I was working at a pizza place, and they had a Joust machine there, and the manager would give us these red quarters. Mm-hmm. And the red quarters, they'd been spray painted red.
Yeah.
And he'd give you like $1 if you did something cool, like if, you mopped the back or something like that, he'd give you like 4 red quarters. And you could just go out and play a game of Joust or Dig Dug or whatever they had at that time. Nice. And then I guess the guy that would come in and collect all the quarters would pull the red ones out and give them back to the manager. So yeah, I got a lot of free Joust games in for that year that I was working at Godfather's Pizza. I don't know if they have those over in Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
Nice place to work.
Yep. Yeah, so that was those were the kind of game. I mean, they were arcade games. They were, but I did have an affinity for simulators, whether it was Lunar Lander, even if it was kind of a, and when I like everybody, I suppose, when I first saw Elite, that just blew my mind. That was like first person space game that seemed just completely open ended. That was a mind blower.
So I got my question. Next is what inspired you to start creating games?
I don't know. I guess part of it was, I mean, I think it's kind of like you get an idea for a game and nobody's going to write it for you. And I mean, and there is a certain amount of, I mean, I enjoyed the technical side of it. I mean, there are some people that might have an idea for a game, hate programming, don't want to learn programming, but that wasn't me. It was a challenge for me that I happily took on because, I wanted to know how they worked. I wanted to know how people created these games because I knew people had done it. I knew that Elite was just two people, or there's Glypha, and so I kind of thought, yeah, I'm curious how you do this, and there was part of me that kind of likes the art side, so games made sense. I mean, I wasn't going to write a spreadsheet, just for the challenge of it. Games were fun because there was an art side. You could sit there and later Mac Paint and make little bitmaps, and then go into the coding side and make them interact and move and that sort of thing. And I've had people say, or I've seen people post online or something or come to me and say, oh, I got this great idea for a game. And I'm like, hey, that's great. You should learn how to program. And it's like, I'm not being a dick.
No.
I mean, maybe I am. But what I'm really saying is, that's what I did. I had a great idea for a game and nobody would write it for me. So I learned how to write it. And, but I get it, if they're just not technically minded, they're like, I like the idea. I've got this idea, but I just don't really want to invest the time it's going to take to learn how to program it. But
sure.
But that's my kind of smart ass answer when.
Oh, really? Can't wait to play it.
By the way, I've seen some pretty wild questions go by, but
Oh, don't worry. We're tagging all those. So at the end, there's a segment, and we'll cover all that. So,
somebody noticed I have my galley cards.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know that? Like that's from an airliner.
Mm-hmm.
I got this crazy idea to buy. I saw them for like $2,000 on eBay.
Oof. Yeah.
Whoa.
For $1,000 to $2,000 on eBay.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted one of these things, so I found a banged up one for like $400 or $500 and bought it. Then I found that there's this sort of network that you have to join. You have to become a member of. That this is this one network that kind of controls all the surplus aircraft places. You ever go to like a pull and pick and pull car park, and they can check on their computer and they say, well, there's a place over in Topeka that's got a 62, Datsun or whatever. That's what these people are. And I found them and I said, I want to find some airline galley carts. And they said, well, you got to become a member and it's going to cost $10,000. And I said, well, forget that. So I'll tell you what, I'll give you a free search, one free search. And then if it works out, you can, so I did a search and I found 20 galley carts for a couple $1,000s in Austin, Texas. And I bought them and they shipped them on a pallet. And then I thought, I'm going to get rich. I'm going to sell these for like a couple $1,000 a pop, make all my money. And I figured I'd sell half of them. And then the other half I'd break even. The other half be free. But all of a sudden the prices on eBay just plummeted. I don't know why. And I couldn't move them. So I sold a handful. I gave a few away at Apple when I was working there, but I still have probably about 8 or so galley.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
They make great standing desks. There's one with booze in it in the kitchen. So they make, actually its intended purpose is a beverage cart, but they also in the bathroom have towels and,
Yeah. That's funny.
That's funny.
I'm sorry. You want to talk about computers?
It's just fine. No, it's interesting. It's interesting because if you've got one of those things where it's like, this would be a great thing. This is the tool, the great tool for whatever it is that you're. Yeah, and that's what I was thinking too. It looks like a giant Mac Pro sitting back there.
Yeah.
But so, John, you were talking about how growing up and having kind of meager like means and all of that, that you didn't really have access to like having computers and stuff, and like couldn't afford a C64. How did you end up using or settling on Macintosh as being the platform
Well,
for all of your games?
by the way, I told you this would tie back in. Something that my mom did. She was a secretary when I was young. When I was like really young, she was a secretary. And one of the things she would do is she'd bring typing paper home. She'd kind of sneak, 30 or 40 pages of typing paper. And so she brought back like pens and pencils and typing paper for me. And that I just would sit there and draw all day with, and I'd also fold out paper airplanes and was real into making paper airplanes. So you see how this is kind of connecting down the road that eventually,
Yeah.
No, I was a friend of mine, the same guy that had the Commodore PET. He ended up getting a scholarship or accepted to Carnegie Mellon University because his family was well off. So he went to Carnegie Mellon, and I think Carnegie Mellon was a very early college that got Macs put in all the dorms. And they had some kind of Apple Talk or something network between all the rooms of the dorms and people, So he came back one summer with a Macintosh, and I don't know if it was a 512 or 128, but he had a Macintosh and an image writer, and that just blew my mind. So that summer we would use Mac Paint, and we would make cassette tape liners. And then we would, type in use the crazy fonts and that sort of thing. And then we'd print them on his image writer, cut them out, and then you'd stick them into a cassette, clamshell or whatever.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was in love with the Macintosh the instant I laid my eyes on it. Those sharp, crisp little black and white pixels. I don't need to, sell that to 1-Bit Fever dreams, for example. But yeah, yeah. But I say, yeah, I wasn't going to be able to afford one. But when I was in college, at some point, like a couple of years into college, I decided to go try to apply for a student loan. And I should say too, as you guys that are older, maybe not my age, but college was affordable-ish. I worked in the cafeteria at the dorm, do a dishwasher and that sort of thing. And I'd work over the summer, and that was enough to pay for books and tuition and that sort of thing. But it was tight, and I decided to apply for a student loan, and I can't remember how much I got the student loan for. But Apple was selling the Macintosh Plus for half price to students, and I think it was like $1,000 or $1,200 or something. But I mean, yeah, that's normally a $2,000 or $2,400 machine.
Right.
So I just kind of twisted my mind in a way to convince myself that buying a Macintosh Plus would be a worthwhile thing to spend a student loan on. I rationalized it. Well, I can do all my papers on it. I don't have to go down to the lab and sign. I mean, you had to go down to a lab where they had the Macintoshes, and you had to sign your name and a time slot, and you have to wait. You have 30 minutes or something like that. So I was going to save time and money, and so but truly I bought the Mac thinking I'm gonna play games on this. I'm gonna try to program it. And by chance, there was in the school newspaper after I bought the Mac Plus, there was a professor selling a copy of Turbo Pascal for the Mac with the manual and the 2 discs or something like that. And I'd taken one class on Pascal in college, so I thought, hey, so that's when I kind of first started dabbling in trying to write something of a game with the Mac Plus. So that's how I got it, was through a student loan. But I was already totally in love with the machine. And yeah, that was like the most expensive thing I'd ever owned in my life, even more expensive than any car that I'd ever owned. I think my Datsun B210 was $400. It was a 10-year-old rust bucket, So, and motorcycles after that were like $200. So a $1,200 computer, I was like scared to death it was going to get stolen, In fact, I built this like case for it, like a kind of like a one of those secretary desks that fold out. But you could fold up the thing and put a padlock on it, so that when we were gone, I think, well, they'd have to break that padlock and blah blah blah. So yeah, that's how paranoid I was that Mac Plus would get ripped off. But yeah, as I said, here it is. This is the same one.
That's awesome.
The only computer that I've kept is my Mac Plus.
Oh, I saw you moving some source code there.
Did you see this?
Don't worry. Somebody has a question about that.
Yeah,
so we will get to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, no.
That's a cool story for people that haven't heard it. So yeah.
So I'm curious as to like what the early days of creating shareware titles was like. Back then there was no internet.
Well, there was,
but
there wasn't a web. That was the nice thing about being at the university too. By the way, I got a degree in education. I was supposed to teach high school. So Ron, I don't know what what do you do? Are you hired?
I work in higher education. I'm information technology, but my entire adult, in my 20s and like our early 20s was much different as in sales and all that. But but I've worked in higher education my entire adult life, basically.
I was supposed to teach. I went all the way to 5th year in college, was student teaching. And I taught at Olathe High School. I had an English class and a physics class that I taught, or a couple of English classes and a physics class. And in fact, I was working on Glider, the commercial one at that time when I was there. And I told the students, I said, I got a game that's being published. And they said, oh, what's it called? I said, it's called Glider. And they're like, oh, that's cool, Mr. Calhoun.
Yeah.
But then when I graduated from college, I'm like, Glider just got published. Should I teach? I said, you know what? I think I can back burner the teaching, see how this game programming goes. Because I had the feeling the game programming was going to fizzle out pretty fast. And so I thought when it kind of crashes and burns, then I'll put my teacher hat on and get a real paycheck. So I don't know. What were you asking about?
The question was, when in the early days of shareware titles, the public access to the internet was
right. Okay, so being at the university, when I got the Macintosh and when I got the Mac Plus, I found out about FTP, and there were a number of FTP sites that you could connect to. I don't remember what terminal program you would run, but I'd go down to the lab because they were on the internet. And you could FTP to Sumax or, I'm trying to remember some of like I'm sure all the big college, probably
UMich,
Stanford, UMich, there you go, .edu. You'd FTP to those and they'd have a directory of stuff and you could go into games or go into games, Macintosh, and you could download shareware games. And that's where I started, I started pulling down all kinds of shareware games for the Macintosh. And that's where I found Dwayne Blim's games like Choplifter and Zero Gravity and Cairo Shootout. And that's where I found, all the other shareware games that were around at that time. Crystal Raiders, the prequel to Crystal Quest. And so at that time, you'd pull it down off of like an FTP site. And there was a place called Budget Bytes. And I swear to God, nobody's ever heard of this. I've brought this up and everybody I've brought this up, like, I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't remember where I would see the ad, but like it was in the back of the newspaper or something like that, if you remember those. But it was like some company in Topeka, and they had a catalog. And in the catalog, they have all these discs and what was on them, and it was just shareware, So here's games disc number 1, and it's got Cairo Shootout and Magic Scepters and whatever the as much shareware as they could fit, Karth of the Jungle, whatever they could fit on a floppy, and they get game disc too. And I think they were, a couple of bucks a disc. So I was ordering these things and starting to hoard shareware. And I think it definitely, when I saw Dwayne Blim's games, he had like an about box, and it was Hometown Software. And he was in Ulysses, Kansas or someplace. And I'm like, wow, that's even more in the sticks than I am. I mean, I'd always thought of Kansas as being really nowhere. And, now I kind of have a certain amount of, pride for Kansas City. Kansas City always lived in the shadow of Chicago, And so we're always second fiddle to Chicago. And I'm sure Chicago always was envious of New York and, bigger cities out east. But so this guy was from like this rinky-dink town in Kansas, and he just came up with Hometown Software, and he's got a little scarecrow icon, and he's got this, send me $10, or if you want the source code or something. And it's like, hey, holy shit, I could probably do that. I mean, who's this guy? And so if I can write a game that's compelling, I guess I just put it on one of these FTP sites. There is an upload button you can click on, or an upload. There was a folder that you could transfer to, and then a moderator or something would screen it, and then it would show up. So that's what I ended up doing when I wrote the first shareware glider, crappy as it was. I went ahead and put it on one of these FTP sites, and then lo and behold, it started kind of showing up at other FTP sites, and I'm like, hey, that was easy. So yeah, that's what it was like. It was just like people like me just sitting around writing these things and putting them out on an FTP site, and then just sort of hoping, somebody would like the game and send you $10 or something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Cool.
I used to get I'd get maybe, I feel like it was $5 or something like that. And because I feel like I would get maybe 2 checks a week on average. And so $10 was enough to get pizza from Pizza Shuttle in the University of Kansas. They had a pizza shuttle come with a little 10-inch, 12-inch pizza and 2 large Cokes. And so my wife and I, girlfriend at the time, we'd get do Pizza Shuttle on Friday. It was like, hey, paid for by shareware. So she thought that was pretty cool. It was a bit of a burden though, because every single shareware check I got, I felt obliged to send a thank you letter to them. And often they'd ask questions like, where'd you get this idea or this and that? And so I'm like, man, I'm spending all this time answering fan mail, And so it got to be a little frustrating, but only because I felt obliged to reply to everybody,
John, kind of in adding on to what Joe was asking about the kind of the early days of the shareware stuff, in that world where there wasn't a lot of public internet access, what platforms helped your games find their audience?
I don't know.
I mean, like AOL. I mean, CompuServe.
Well, when AOL
Prodigy.
came around.
That was like, or like first class BBSs, or
by the time AOL came around, that's probably when Glider 4 had been published with Cassidy and Green, because that ended up being like, because you could create your own houses with Glider 4.0. Then people could upload these houses, and it became kind of this cool thing, just like the pinball construction set or something, from earlier time that you could, or the roller coaster. Yeah, I can't remember. You know what I'm talking about. That you could upload these, and people could download. And I think that was just a happy accident that AOL came around at that time. That I had written this house editor. That was just kind of a happy accident. When I kind of was trying to sell Glider to Cassidy and Green, I kind of cold called them and said, I wrote this game. Do you want to publish it? And when Michael Green had taken a look at it, he said, yeah, you're going to we want it to be in color though. I said, yeah, sure. And I don't have a color computer. He says, oh, that's okay. We can give you a an advance against royalties, and you go buy whatever color computer you want. I'm like,
Ooh.
really? What if it doesn't sell? Do I get to keep the computer?
Yeah.
And then of course, modest me, what do? I go out and buy a 2SI that doesn't even have a math coprocessor because it wasn't as cheap as the LC, but it was the second cheapest Mac you could get. Because I knew people when they got that, like, oh, you're going to give me advanced get royalties, I'm going to go buy a 2FX. They buy the fastest, badassest machine with the best high-res monitor they could get. But I go and buy a modest 2SI because,
Well, but again, SI, sound inside, you can actually record audio and things like that, which was kind of a novelty without having
Yeah, it was
like an add-on, like, Faleron and different companies made like those serial port based microphones and all that.
Farallon, Farallon had a little office in Lawrence, Kansas when I was going to the university. And there were a couple of engineers there that would say, hey, John, you should come work at Farallon. And I said, I'm not smart enough to work at Farallon. He said, you'd be surprised. I don't know what that meant. Did that mean that he thought I was smarter than I was giving myself credit for, or that the guys at Farallon were kind of feel like they were struggling too? I don't know.
I don't know.
I would find out later, though, when I went to work at Apple, that what real smart people are like. So I think he was giving me much more credit than I deserved. But yeah, there was a Farallon office and a couple of engineers, and that I would run into from time to time. I'd run into them at like trade shows, like at Macworld. I'd see, hey, you guys are they're at the Farallon, booth, hanging out, and say, hey, John Calhoun, They said, oh yeah, we got this great idea for a game. It's a card game. It's called Cards. I said, what is this? Well, it's just a deck of cards. Mm-hmm. I said, okay. He said, no, it's like it's a deck of cards that we share on the network. And if you take a card from the deck, you can see it, but nobody else can. And then if you put it in a discard pile, then everybody can see it. And it's the same deck of cards. I said, hey, that's pretty cool. But I mean, that's kind of, they were kind of fun guys to run into from time to time. They were sort of always wanting to write games or something.
So, John, I got a question. Can you tell us about the connection your games have with the Wizard of Oz series?
Well, so this is embarrassing. I mean, Soft Dorothy's an embarrassing.
Why?
I don't know. Well, you don't think so? Okay.
No.
Well, so when Dwayne Blim had his scarecrow, when I saw Dwayne Blim's game had a little scarecrow icon, he called himself Hometown Software. I was just thinking of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. See, that's what I assumed. He has a little scarecrow. Mm-hmm. I assumed it was the scarecrow from The Wizard of Oz. Yeah. Maybe it's just a scarecrow because he lived out in the farms, Mm-hmm. But I thought of The Wizard of Oz, and so I'm thinking Dorothy Software. But sort of like Microsoft, I'm thinking maybe Dorothy Soft. Mm-hmm. But because I'm in college and I'm edgy, I just flip it around and it becomes not Dorothy Soft, but Soft Dorothy, because I'm edgy. And so that's and then I go and scan a clip art on the ThunderScan. They had a flatbed scanner, 1-bit flatbed scanner, and had the it was a HyperCard or something plug-in that Atkinson wrote that would do the dithering. And so really nice, like Victorian era or so engraving of a fairy. Mm-hmm. And she's looking at a butterfly, and she's naked, of course, from the waist up. And so, of course, I scan that and make that the logo. And occasionally I would get a hate mail from like somebody who said that that was obscene,
Yeah.
Well,
did we lose Ron?
And she's like, I thought it was cute.
Well, I was thinking about it, and like I said, I'm kind of embarrassed by just the whole name and all. It just sounds so edgelord, Soft Dorothy Software, and the naked fairy and everything. But I was thinking about it, and it's kind of more like, were you ever in college and you'd come up with insane names for a band or something, like the Beat Offs or something, and then you think, if I had a band, I'd name it this. You come up with something wild. Well, it was kind of like this opportunity where, like, hey, I've got a software company. What's a wild name I could? Because you're not expecting that it's going to go anywhere. It's going to be this one-off thing that, crashes and burns. Nobody ever sees the game. Then it ends up, you end up writing more games and it becomes a brand of sorts. So it was kind of, unfortunate that way. It's kind of like I always think of like bands like 10,000 Maniacs. I'm pretty sure that what's her name from 10,000 Maniacs. I have the feeling that the band, when they started, didn't think that they were going to go the direction they ended up going. And so now they're stuck with this name that makes you think it's probably heavy metal band. And then it's like, oh no, it's this indie band with a woman singer that's very lilting and almost folky. So.
No, I get it. Give me 1 second here.
I did when I did an actual kids game, which was MacTuberling, which was kind of like Mr. Potato Head. It was just kind of for fun. I said I'm not going to put the Soft Dorothy half naked fairy on that, so that just has like
on this one, right?
On this one. So that had a picture of Ozma from one of the Wizard of Oz books. You just scanned in Ozma and put her in there, and so that's the one that's sort of family friendly.
Yeah, I was gonna say Ozma kind of figures in on a lot of glider stuff too, because her portrait is one of the assets that you can use for building your houses. So
yeah, that's right. On one of the houses, or the painting on the wall is of Ozma. Yeah.
But speaking of kind of glider and all that type of stuff, but you famously partnered with Cassie and Green to do all of that commercial distribution on your titles. What was it like working with them?
Yeah. So I'll backtrack and tell you that I read Stephen Levy's book Hackers, and I'm going to say 88, 89 or something, whenever it came out in softbound, because the hardback I wasn't going to be able to afford. But about a year after the hardback would come out, they'd come out with a softbound version of the book. So I picked up Hackers, and I don't know, have you read that book?
I have not. No.
It's a fun read. I have to say, I'll bet you Stephen Levy is embarrassed by it now, because I've gone back and read it since, and it's really cheesily written. It's just, it's like, it's like writing 101. He was new at writing. I think he's probably good now, but I think that's like his first real book that he put out, and he's just overly dramatic but he kind of covers like different eras of when normal human beings, as opposed to the priests, the computer science priests, but when normal human beings like you and I were able to get a hold of a computer. And he starts back with like the Model Railroad Club and MIT, when they had a PDP, access to a PDP, whatever, 7, 8, 9, 11, whatever the PDP was. And they'd go in at night and steal time to be able to hook up this model railroad. And this is where a lot of the hacker culture began, with, all the, the FUBAR and some of the hacker dictionary terminology that that we have now kind of started in these cultures. Yeah. But he has one chapter that he talks about the explosion of games for the Apple II, and the kids that would play D&D all night, knock back 2-liter bottles of Coke all night, and code and get paid. It was on Sierra Online. Who's the Ron or the two? The husband.
Yeah, it's Ken and Roberta Williams.
Ken and Roberta Williams. And so he's got a chapter about that, and they're hanging out in hot tubs out in the Sierra Mountains, just having a good time. And I thought, man, I missed that boat. If I had only been smarter when I was a little younger, I could have been out there in a hot tub in California, knocking back 2 liters of Coke, writing code, and getting paid for it. But something about that made me think, because I'd done at that point probably 3 or 4 shareware games, and I just thought, I ought to at least try to get published. So I ended up calling 2 companies. The first one was Maxis, because they'd just come out with SimCity. And I thought, they're new, but I didn't realize that Maxis is pretty much one guy, But then the other one I called was Cassie and Green, because they had, besides Crystal Quest, they had Sky Shadow and a third game, and they actually advertised in Macworld magazine. You'd see ads for Cassie and Green with Sky Shadow and Crystal Quest. And, and so I called them, and I think there's been like a couple of times in my life when I've done something kind of cocky, kind of that it, to me, it was sort of, I was kind of embarrassed by it. Like, I think I prefer to be humble. I don't know. It's my character. I kind of, maybe it's shyness or something. I just kind of,
it's a Midwestern thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a Midwestern thing. Maybe it's growing up poor. I don't know. But there were a couple of times where I just thought, fuck it. I don't have anything to lose. Let me just, sell myself. And so when I called Michael Green at Casting Green, he says, so what's the game? I said, Glider. He says, can you send me a copy? I said, oh, you can just download it from any FTP site. I said something kind of dick like that. Like, oh, just download,
Mm-hmm.
Come on. Yeah, exactly. And whether that helped or not, I don't know. It didn't hurt because then he did call me back and said, color. He says, it's got to have more rooms. And I said, he says maybe 20 or 30 rooms. I said, I'm thinking 40. And I said, and if I'm going to go to the work of doing 40 rooms in a house, I think I'm going to go ahead and make a level editor because I'm going to need a level editor.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be tediously putting in constants and moving a table over 2 pixels and running the game through again.
Yeah.
I'm going to want to have an editor where I can move things around. And so he's like, yeah, sure. It wasn't part of the deal, but if you want to do an editor, go for it. And as I said, it kind of was a happy accident that AOL came out because then people were uploading houses and, there was a kind of synergy or something to that.
Well, again, like the kind of the community built around that game was just nuts, where people would be like, oh, I made it look like my house, or I did it where it's like like a Victorian mansion, and I did
I downloaded those too. I downloaded them too and played them, and I can't say that I played them all the way through, but occasionally I'd come across a real gem and I'd kind of make a note, and some of those guys ended up working on the house for Glider Pro. When I finally did a sequel, I called them up and said, hey, you want to help on, I'm doing a new version of Glider. Do you want to work on it? And you'll be getting a beta version and all that. And there was one house by a guy named Ward Hartenstein, and it was called Hands Off House. And it blew my mind because you'd start the game, you'd load the house, start Glider, and you took your hands off the keyboard, the mouse, and the thing. He just had fans and vents set up just right to kind of push the Glider through, and the timing was nailed. Like balls would bounce, toasters would pop, and he'd had time so you would just blow past, and you'd come back in through a vent through the same room you had been in before, but coming from a different direction, and he'd timed that, and I was just like, wow, how long did it take him to tweak these things and make it so that so anyway, Ward was right on the top of the list. Like, when I was doing Glider Pro, I said, hey, Ward, do you want to work on this? And I loved your Hands Off house. But that it also ended up being kind of a bit of a frustration for me too, though, because as I said, like a year or so ago, I started to rewrite Glider 4 for Steam to run on cross-platform, like I did with Glypha, as Joe was showing earlier. Yeah. And one thing that frustrated the hell out of me was that I couldn't get Hands Off House to play. I didn't really want to do the exact same physics because Glider 4.0 ran at 30 frames a second. And I mean, come on, it's a no-brainer to do 60 these days. And so if I kind of tweak the physics to make 60 feel right, things like the timing and stuff were just off, and Hands Off House wouldn't work. And so I'm like, damn, I wanted to be able to pull in any house that anybody had ever written and posted to AOL. I wanted to be able you could pull that into the new version of Glider on Steam, and it would just play like it used to. But I thought, if I can't play Hands Off House, then who knows what other sort of timing things are lurking in a house, and you get 50 rooms into the house and run into a room you can't get past, and then So maybe I'll have to have a compatibility mode or something that drops down to 30 frames, or does some sort of fake tweening in between the 30 frames to kind of make it look a little smoother, but it's still internally running at maybe a 30. The physics are kind of clicking along at 30, but it's just putting an extra frame in. Yeah, I don't know. But go ahead.
No, I had another question, but you sounded like you had something else you want to continue.
No, I just feel like I didn't answer the question because I didn't really tell you what it was like working with Cassie and Green. I just kind of told you how.
No, that's fine.
I ingratiated myself to Cassie.
Right.
And Green.
No, you're good. It's fine.
Well, I honestly don't want to just talk constantly.
Why not?
Well, because I'd get tired of listening if I was somebody else.
We're loving it.
Yeah.
Well, we'll leave a little breathing space in here.
Sure.
They did fly me out to California, and it was I'd been out to California because my sister had gone to school there, and she eventually got my mom to move out to California. But it was the first time I'd been to the Bay Area. They were in a little tiny hole in the wall. It was like a strip mall in why am I drawing a blank now? The town, small town in California. I'll think of it in a second. But it was a town known for East of Eden, film East of Eden, or by the writer. Again, I'm drawing a blank.
Oh gosh,
Steinbeck,
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of what the area is known for, and they grew lettuce. But there was a strip mall, and there was a little tiny building in the strip mall, or lot in the strip mall, that was Cassidy and Green, and it was kind of divided in two. One half had computers and desks and looked like something from the show The Office, and then the other side was their quote unquote warehouse, where they had all the floppies were being, machines were cranking out floppies, and there was a woman there that would put the labels on, and they'd put them into boxes, and then they'd get boxes of this stuff, and they'd send it off to Computer Warehouse or whoever, to ship. But yeah, I was just amazed at how nice everyone was. And I think I had kind of like a, what's the word I'm looking for? I had a chip on my shoulder about California. I had a few girlfriends that had moved off to California, and I'd lost them that way. So I kind of had it in for California in a bit. So when I went there and found out how friendly everybody was, it was really disarming how friendly they were. But they were kind of like a family company. Michael's wife worked there. His father-in-law worked there. So then the other people that they brought on were just like family. Did fonts, Robin Cassidy was the Cassidy half, and he'd done a bunch of fonts. And back then, you could sell a font for $50-$60. But then I remember kind of as time went on, companies came out, and I remember Robin Cassidy bitching about, I feel it was like Bitstream or somebody was coming out with font packs that would give you like 50-60 fonts for like, $30-$40. And he's like, fuck, man, race to the bottom. There goes my income stream. So it eventually became more the games and utilities. The fonts kind of, diminished in terms of sales. But Green had his Quick Decks. That was the thing he was really proud of. And I remember him telling me how he'd lost, he'd been working on it. Something had crashed, and his entire hard drive was shot, and he didn't have a backup. Ooh. And he just wanted to cry. But that he ended up just sitting down eventually and rewriting it. It took a week, and he had to rewrite the entire damn thing from scratch. Oh. And, those horror stories, you hear that. But I can tell you, I had a few things like that, not on that scale, where I lost work because I'd forgotten to save and the machine crashed, and I'd have to rewrite something that had taken hours. And I often found, as frustrating as that was, the second time wasn't that hard, and you ended up doing it better. So it was like there was a kind of a silver lining to the thing. But I mean, again, maybe that kind of gives you some sense of the time, where no cloud, you had to make a point to back up, and you'd better not back up onto your hard drive, because if that failed,
right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And often they would. In fact, I keep going on tangents here. So this is my hard drive. I think it's 20 gigabytes or something. Yeah. And I hung on to it.
Or 20 megabytes.
Yeah, I was gonna say gigabytes.
I think something like that.
Oh my gosh, John! I wanted to talk to you about a personal loan.
It's a zero footprint. You can just set the Mac right on it.
Yeah.
And of course it's SCSI.
SCSI, of course, yeah.
And once I got this guy up and running recently, like a year or so ago, and thanks to Blue SCSI, by the way, I was able to put a Blue SCSI into the back and CF card and some kind of version of Mac System 6 or something. There you go. Got that thing up and running. And I said I don't think the floppy worked, and I've got some floppies that I wanted to see what was on them, but I really wanted to see what was on the hard drive because I haven't had this thing booted in 30 years or something like that. And it wouldn't boot. It wouldn't come up. And I took it apart and I put a multimeter on the power supply, and I saw that the drive was getting the voltages. So I thought maybe the power supply just, leaky cap or something like that. But the power supply was fine, but the drive just wouldn't spin up. So I did what you're not supposed to do. I opened up the drive. I thought at this point I don't have anything to lose. So I took the cover off, and there's the spindle and the platters, and I tried to move the arm, and it wouldn't move. And I thought, I kind of think it should move. I think sometimes they had a lock kind of thing when they were parked, but this one wasn't parked. The head was out in the middle of the platter. I'm like, that's odd. So kind of like, again, throwing caution to the wind, I just said, fuck it. I just kind of pushed on the arm, and it popped. And then would move freely, and I'm like, okay. and where when I got it to move, where the head had been sitting, there's this little discoloration on the platter itself, and I don't know if it's from the head having corroded or just magnetism or something. I don't know. So I thought, well, if I even get this thing up and running, I bet you that sector's gone. Hope there wasn't anything interesting on that sector. But yeah, I put the thing back together. Powered it on, I heard the drive spin up, and it mounted, and I was able to copy everything off onto an SD card on the Blue SCSI and then move it over to a modern machine and that. So I was able to recover a lot of sources and things that I thought I had lost. I tried to keep all my sources and kind of migrate them over the years, but there were just times where you'd move from one Mac OS 10 version to another, and you'd lose all your resource forks, and I didn't know it. Until later, now here I go and, I've got all this stuff in the cloud. I go into the cloud. I'm like, oh, resource fork, 0 bytes, So sometimes to try to recover some of these games, if I could find the game on Macintosh Garden, I could pull it down, copy the resources out, except for the data resource or the code resource, and make a new resource fork for it. And then I could compile and build the app again. But there were a few games that I couldn't find, and like I did a game called I did a card game called War. Have you ever played the game War? It's like the stupidest game in the world. And I had this idea though that you actually can't win War, because when my sister and I would play War with each other, we just at some point just be bored and give up, because it seemed like as you start to win the game and get more and more of the cards, you're also got more and more shitty cards. So then when you're and I guarantee you that your opponent, my sister, if she was down to 3 or 4 cards, they were very good cards. So then it would kind of shift the other way. She'd start winning all the hands because she had the good cards, and I had all the crappy ones that I'd won. So I thought, is this going to be one of these things that just sort of seesaws back and forth and you never win? So I wrote a version of War for the Mac and could have the computer play against itself. And he'd give it 1 deck, 2 decks, 3 decks. And it turned out that, something like around 2 to 3 decks. Man, that game, I think my sister and I would have been playing for weeks before there was a winner. So lesson learned. But it was one of those, I never really, I think I don't even know if I uploaded it to an FTP site, but it was just something I had. And I didn't have the resource fork from it, but I found it again on that hard drive. So
that's awesome.
It's like, whew, I can get War up and running again. For what it's worth.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
So I have a question for you that's related to all these games, and it makes me wonder if you expected Glider to be the success that it was.
No. I mean, it was. I mean, you mean at the shareware level? That was the first surprise that anybody would send me a check, for $5 or whatever. That was the first surprise, and then when I got it published through Cassie and Green, that was a surprise. I just, like I said, I just thought, let's try. I mean, why not? What's the harm? And then when they published it, and then it won like Game Hall of Fame for Macworld in 1991 or something for the best arcade game of the year. And I saw somebody comment somewhere, probably on YouTube or something, that said, Glider's not that great of a game. It's just that there were so few games on the Mac that, and I thought, well, I gave that some serious thought. And I think
John, I'll just say that person can eat my whole ass.
No,
it's a great game. What are you talking about?
It is so unique.
Too.
Well, yeah. So Casting Green, they did. There was a friend of Jeff Robin who was a Windows programmer, and Casting Green hired him, just paid him a flat out fee to port Glider to Windows, and it didn't sell. So there's something to be said that if Glider had come out on Windows instead of the Mac, yeah, maybe it would have been an also ran, and not. But so I wanted to give that guy a certain amount of credit. That maybe it was a small, maybe it was a bigger fish because it was in a small pond. But I'll be a little defensive here and say that when I look back at Glider, I think it's almost the perfect Mac game. And I don't mean to say that I hope I don't sound arrogant saying that, but I mean, my first experience with the Mac were the icons on the desktop, the trash can, the folders. I mean, that whole graphical user interface just blew my mind. And I think I was channeling it when I do a house with vents and clocks and even a trash can, that I was, in a way, it was kind of a graphical, I don't know. So, I feel like Glider in a way was an extension of the Mac desktop. I don't know that I wasn't consciously channeling that, but I think I see a kind of a synergy there, or something, an influence or something there. So I think maybe if it was, it wouldn't have even made sense on like a Windows or something. It was a little more of a, I guess I feel too like the Mac was kind of whimsical. Maybe that's the right word.
Yeah,
I agree. I remember that by the time I was in the Mac universe, I was very immersed in the Mac, and I remember that all the games in all the computers were war, hitting things, or space, and this was very special. It was very different than everybody else, and I love it.
That's true. I should say I was a little put off by violent games. I mean, I had a friend of mine, and he wanted to do a game where you're a sniper.
Yeah.
And there would be targets, and you'd be able to, when you put the scope up, you'd see them blown up, or zoomed in. And you'd have to take into account windage and all, and range, and set ticks to adjust the scope so that you could dial in the range and adjust for windage. And I mean, he's smart. He knows competitive shooting. And so he would bring to this, I think he was like the first or second place in Kansas for competitive shooting. He would do prone, sitting, standing, and just swept competition back in when we were in high school or so. Yeah. So, but the idea that you're picking people off, just I wasn't gonna write a game like that.
And somebody commented before that his wife liked it. I had the same experience. A lot of friends, female friends at the time, they didn't play games normally, but they liked to play that one when we were playing when I showed it to them, because it was it's kind of like a safe, nice game, relaxing game. It's not shooting, it's not violent, it's not so it's relaxing.
By the way, I saw a comment somebody had made where somebody had uploaded Glider Pro video, like a walkthrough or something on YouTube, and somebody in the comments said, oh, that sounds like let's see, I wrote it. That sounds like the Eels, Mr. E's Beautiful Blues. And I'm like, what? I'm a huge Eels fan, and I didn't know I didn't know that song. I went and looked it up, and I'll just put this out there. If you go look up the Eels song, Mr. E's Beautiful Blues, they're right. There's I think Mark, the guy from the Eels, I think he ripped me off, but that's cool because I'm a huge fan of the Eels. I don't know if it's just a happy accident or if he's ever even played the game Glider, but let's go. By the way, there's profanity in the song. I'll just warn you.
That's fine. Anybody watching has heard profanity in these streams.
Yeah, it's all right.
Good.
Probably heard it in the past 15 minutes, in fact.
Yeah.
It's all good.
So John, what game that you've written do you consider to be the underdog?
I don't know. So, I mean, I think Pararina is the obvious choice, maybe, because I mean it's kind of a stupid game, and yet there's this small percentage of people that they just love that game, but I think probably for the majority of people it's just frustrating as hell. And I find you can kind of get into the groove and you can kind of enjoy the game. But if you don't get into the groove, it's just frustrating as hell. But that's the kind of weird one that, I don't know if underdog's the right word. I don't know. I mean, I wrote games that to entertain myself. I'd have an idea. Let me see if I can do it. Is this fun? And, I'd probably write 4 or 5 sort of proto games, like a roller arena, or like I mentioned, the war card game. I did games that were kind of more like Space Simulator, kind of like, there's the original Pararina. But
love it.
But occasionally I'd write something that was kind of half-assed fun to play, and think, well, maybe I should go ahead and go all the way and add high scores and add sounds and add AI opponents, and so Pararina was one that kind of crossed this threshold with me that I thought, this is kind of different. I ought to go all the way and finish it up. But there were a lot of games that weren't quite so fun. I put a bunch of them up on GitHub, that I tried to collect a lot of these, and I'd collect the sources and try to get them to compile on the original Think Pascal or Lightspeed Pascal, and try to recreate the projects with the resource fork and get so you could compile and run the game. And so they're all up there on GitHub. I think I did all the commercial games except for the one I did with Jeff Robin and the shareware games. And then I started putting up a couple of volumes of these sort of unfinished games that never quite, made the cut. And I've got at least another volume that I could upload that were sort of the color years. Yeah, wow. I didn't even tell you about Jeff Robin and working at Apple, starting to work.
Don't worry, there's more questions.
Okay, well, keep asking. I see it's already past 8, and I'm
we're on your schedule, sir.
No,
so
don't worry about it.
So we're happy to talk to you. But actually, that is the next question.
When you see people starting to drop off, maybe you can wrap it up then.
Okay.
Well, there are more people watching now than at the beginning, so we're still
we build because of the time zone difference and stuff. So the Pacific time zone people come in.
Yeah, they're just finishing dinner. Sure.
Yeah. But that was actually going to be the next question. Would you talk to us a little bit about working at Apple Computer?
I was thinking about Jeff Robin because I met him through Cassidy and Green. Do you know who Jeff Robin is? Does that name sound familiar? Yeah. When I was working at Cassidy and Green, they emailed or called me. Michael called me at one point, Michael Green, and said, "Hey, we got this guy. He's from Chicago. He's going to college there, and he's written some utilities for the Macintosh. He's got one that's really nice. That's like, it finds extension conflicts, and then it'll kind of do this sort of binary thing where if you have a problem, you tell it, and it would keep restarting your Mac and disabling half, and it kind of do some sort of binary tree sort of search down to where he could say, okay, here are the 2 extensions that are in conflict." And he says, the guy doesn't have any good sort of UI or art. You want to do some artwork for it? I said, yeah, sure. So I did some icons and that sort of thing. And then, of course, they put out Conflict Catcher. And I think Conflict Catcher probably made, 100 times what Glider made, for Cassidy and Green. So I think they were loving that cash cow that was Jeff Robin. But at some point, Jeff Robin ended up, of course, he got getting a job at Apple. And ended up, I mean, he's a smart guy. I mean, he went to University of Illinois, or I can't remember what university he went to, but he's a smart guy, much, much, much smarter than I am. But he wanted to do a collaborative game with me. And so we ended up doing Spaceway 2000. And I don't think either one of us liked it. I think because it was just kind of hard to do collaboratively. It's like, I didn't really want to drive the ship because I felt like Jeff, I didn't want to just like, this is my game. I wanted to kind of include Jeff. So it was kind of like we wrote the game by committee. So that's never a good way to write a game. But I think he was really enjoying. He could write some really fast blitting routines that could do instead of using copy bits, which is what I would use. That's the system call to copy pixels to the screen. He'd go and write some stuff in assembly that would do it, just lightning fast, but have certain limitations, like everything has to be a multiple of 8 pixels wide and you can't have clipping or whatever. So he'd go and write code that would make the game much, much faster than I could have written it. And then I was supposed to be the creative sort of aspect to it. But again, I kind of didn't really want to make it my game. So yeah, I don't think at the end of the day, either one of us were very happy with it. But so I never included the sources when I put it up on GitHub, because I don't know what Jeff would think if I did that. He'd probably be embarrassed, or I don't know, maybe he wouldn't care.
Well, all you got to do is share the source code, that Sound Jam program. That never went anywhere.
Yeah,
that's something totally forgotten by history.
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll get to Sound Jam. But Cassie and Green sent me out to Apple before I had a job there. They sent me out there because Apple was having a kitchen. You know what those are?
No.
They called them a kitchen, and what they did is they'd bring in engineers, developers that were outside Apple, and they would have them for a week, and you get to meet the engineers that work at Apple, and they would, and at this time, the Newton had just come out, and they wanted to get third parties writing apps for the Newton. So one way to do that is you invite third parties to send their engineers to Apple, to Cupertino, and you spend a week on campus, and the engineers that wrote the Newton code are there, and they can help you. And Cassie and Green got an invite, and they called me and said, "Hey John, you want to fly out from Kansas to spend a week at Apple and learn how to program the Newton?" I'm like, "Sure, sign me up." So I spent a week there and ended up just trying to figure out how to drag an object or animate an object on the Newton, to take a bitmap, display it, and move it around, or click and drag it. And just from that week, having been able to drag an object around, I went back and wrote a casino game that was a blackjack, baccarat, video poker, and craps. And so there were like 4 sort of casino games, all for your Newton, called Silicon Casino. And but when I was there, I met this guy who was Hispanic, and he had written a little app called El Avisador, and it was kind of like a Magic 8-Ball, where if you wanted to settle a yes or no question, you would bring up Mr. Avisador on your Apple Newton, and it would come up, and Mr. Avisador would say you yes or no, C or no, and and it was kind of, in a way, I was kind of thinking, this guy works at Apple, and this is the best he can come up with is a Magic 8-Ball app that does yes or no. I mean, I was a little disappointed, frankly. But at the same time, I'm like, this is pretty badass. This guy works at Apple. And I remember they had kind of like a beer bash kind of thing on the last day, where they had drinks and stuff, all hors d'oeuvres set up to kind of try to, make you feel like your family with Apple, and now go out there and write these killer apps for the Newton. So I was talking to the guy, the Hispanic guy, and I said, "Man, that's so cool that you work here at Apple." And he says, "Oh, you could work here." And I said, "I don't think so." I didn't go to Carnegie Mellon University or University of Illinois. He says, No, not everybody, got college degrees in this sort of thing. He says, "You write games, you could work here." And that was like, I was like, "Are you serious?" I was thinking to myself, "Nah, he's just being polite, But that was kind of the first clue I had that the first sort of spark that wow, maybe I could work at Apple. And of course, Jeff Robin did, right out of college, he went straight to Apple and started working on their new, I don't remember what he did at first. It was something that was pretty deep into the bowels of the Mac. But at some point, Apple was trying to work on their own kernel to have their own true multitasking operating system that the Amiga had, but the Mac, didn't. And at that time too, I didn't even understand what they were meaning. Like, what are you talking about? It's like, I can run multi-finder and run multiple apps. What are you talking about? Well, no, you understand, with a true multitasking operating system, each program has their own program space. Like, okay, whatever that means, and there's a kernel and it manages memory. I'm like, what's that? Kernel, sergeant? What the? These were terms. I didn't understand any of this stuff, but I understood that it was something that you would want to strive for. And Jeff Robin was the kind of person, he was at that level that he could do this kind of thing. So he was working on, at least at some point, what was called, was it New Kernel? I think it was called New Kernel.
Because he's part of the Copeland project.
Yeah, it was Copeland, or there was Talogen and yellow and pink. I don't remember what the distinction between.
They went through all the colors.
Yeah, but you're right. Yeah, so it was Copeland or something, and it was going to be the next big operating system for the Macintosh that was going to have a true kernel underlying, and then of course Apple bought Next, and they already had their kernel, so it was kind of like, who's gonna win this battle? But yeah, but eventually I did get a job at Apple. You were talking about the early internet, and do you know about Usenet?
Yeah.
Very early kind of message board, and there were sort of categories for there was a comp.mac.programming or whatever. I can't remember the exact, but you go down this sort of forum nest tree, and then there would be people asking questions about, programming the Mac. Like, hey, I tried to do this and it crashed, and somebody's, oh, well, you should look at this, or maybe you need to lock the handle before you release, or whatever. And so I thought that was really cool. And I asked questions on that forum, and people would reply, and somebody would ask a question, and I'm like, oh, I know the answer to that. So I'd reply. And it was because I was on Usenet that when Apple had an opening, internally, they're like, hey, we need another graphics engineer. One of the guys that worked there says, hey, how about John Calhoun? Like, he's this guy that wrote that game Glider. He probably knows graphics. And so they gave me a call or emailed or something and said, how would you like to come out to interview and to Apple? I said, sure. And so they flew me out to Cupertino. I spent a whole day interviewing. And I think, Ron, you were talking about this, the book here.
Yeah.
So, this is the way I backed up source code. I mean, if you really wanted to back up, you just print it out. And so I literally, when I finished Glider, this is Glider Pro, but when I finished Glider Pro, I just literally on a laser writer, whatever it was, I printed the entire thing out. And I thought, worst case scenario, let's hope it never comes to that, but worst case scenario, I could go through this and I could literally type it in again if I had to. And so I printed all this out. And I went someplace in the university, they bind it and that sort of thing. So I was able to make this kind of, back before you had, online services, I was able to make kind of a book. So I again, cheekily, I brought this with me when I flew out to California to be interviewed. And so at the interview, they come in, you had to go through, like, it was like running a gauntlet. There would be two engineers come in. And so it was almost, I don't know, it was good cop, bad cop, but you'd kind of feel a little put off that there were two guys sitting across the table from you and you by yourself, and they're going to essentially interrogate you. And then they'll leave after 45 minutes and somebody else or two other people would come in. And so every time when new people come in, this book would be sitting on the desk, the table, and it ended up being this great sort of, conversation starter. They've or icebreaker. That's the phrase. Like, oh, holy shit, this guy prints out his source code. Look at that. You print all your source code out. Look at that. And then we get to chatting and that sort of thing. And maybe if you saw I wrote about on my blog, there was this one guy that was sort of the math guy for the team, the graphics team. He was the math guy. So anytime there was something really complicated, like, maybe some kind of transforms or matrices or something, they'd go to this guy, or anti-aliasing or whatever. And so they kept telling me about this guy. Oh, wait till so-and-so comes in and to interview you. And I said, what should I expect? This, this guy, yeah, he's brutal. And so I was scared to death. And he was like the last guy to interview. And sure enough, he comes in by himself, and he looks like Frank Black from the Pixies. He's this big guy. And he says, so he doesn't want to look at the book at all. And I said, oh, you're such and such. I won't tell you his name. And he says, I said, I heard about you. And he says, oh yeah, what did you hear about me? And I said, well, I don't know. I heard that you're going to be tough. Tough? I don't think I'm tough. I said, well, I heard you're going to ask me about, I don't know, entropy and information theory or something like that. And I said, I didn't get a degree in computer science, so I don't know anything about that. And he just sits back and he says, tell me about information theory. Like, what a prick. I said, well, now see, here's where I was kind of bullshitting. It's true. I didn't take any computer science, but I had been reading about information theory and some of these things that would come up in magazines or something on programming. So I was able to kind of half-ass it. Information theory is sort of it is sort of like entropy, where if you take data and you try to compress it and compress it and compress it, at some point it becomes noise. So if you can, but the point just before it's noise, it's still information. And so there's limits to how far you can compress things. And he's like, oh, no. And he starts to correct me. And the next thing you know, he's teaching me. And so for the next half hour, he's explaining all this stuff about information theory. And then he leaves, and I'm like, I don't know. Did I pass? I mean, I didn't know he was doing all the talking. And then I heard from Jeff. I was still in contact with Jeff Robin. He'd been working at Apple for a year or so. They used to play poker with certain members of the team at Apple, would have poker night. And so he kind of had sort of settled in and had a group there. So he kind of knew what was going on among the other teams. So I remember emailing or calling Jeff and telling him, well, I haven't heard from Apple in 2 or 3 weeks. So I don't think it's going to happen. And he says, oh, you haven't heard from him yet? I said, no. He said, oh, shoot, maybe I shouldn't say anything. Well, just wait. You'll hear something. It's something bad. He says, no, I don't think it's bad. And then, the next day I got an invite, an offer. And they said, you come out, you'll start as an engineer in the graphics team. You'll make $85,000 a year or something like that. And I'm like, holy shit. Okay. So I told my girlfriend at the time, I said, let's go to a Chinese restaurant that we always went to in Lawrence and celebrate that I was given a job offer. And I swear to God, the fortune cookie said, take the path that has been placed before you. I still have that fortune cookie. I'm like, wow. I said, I think we're going to California.
That's
so
great.
We did.
Yeah.
We brought our 2 cats and went out to California. Couple of Midwesterners out in California, Silicon Valley, and all the high prices of everything and the traffic and all that. But we were having a good time. But the whole time, the first several years, I was scared shitless. I just thought, I don't know what I'm doing. I'm in over my head. Everybody here is much smarter than me. They're going to figure this out and they're going to fire me. I'll just try to pretend for as long as I can that I know what I'm doing, but they're going to figure it out and then they're going to fire me. And too, this is kind of when Apple was starting to circle the drain. And after a year or so, it really was. I mean, whole teams would get laid off. Like an entire hallway would just get laid off.
Ooh.
And we assholes that we were, we'd go walking down the hall and see all their computers in the dumps, and we'd start opening them up and pulling the RAM out, pulling the hard drive. So our computers were just maxed out. We'd just put as much RAM as they could take, the biggest hard drive, There's many, biggest hard drive we could fit, as many we could SCSI chain together. So we were brutal. We just kind of like, pick through the bones of what was left behind. But then, and then a month or so go by, and another team on another floor and a hallway would just empty out, and all the machines would be out in the hallway. And it was just like, I wasn't like a programmer. I was a Mac programmer. And what I mean by that is I thought, if this is it and I get laid off, I said, I'm not going to like go work at Microsoft or learn how to program the PC. I'm just going to go teach or something like that. If I get programmed for the Mac, I don't want to do it. So that's kind of where I was at. But then so in fact, I was on the QuickDraw GX team, and they did get shut down. They said, this QuickDraw GX just isn't happening. You're all gone. But it was almost like somebody threw me a life preserver. This color sync team said, hey, John, you want to come work on the color sync team? I said, oh, versus being laid off? Yeah, sure.
Yes. Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you. So I ended up going to the color sync team, and I didn't know anything about color. But again, met some really smart people that worked there that taught me. And yeah, I mean, that's really what it was. Is I was a dumb kid from Kansas, in over my head, but I had a lot of super smart people, and they were, a few of them were willing to kind of teach me. And so I learned how to write Bloom filters and, do this kinds of things that I, probably we would have learned in a computer science course, but, I hadn't learned. But to try to sort of balance that and say, and not sell myself too short, I can say this from my 30 years or 27 years or 26 years at Apple, is that I think I wrote more code than most people. I just would knock it out. I'd have 2 or 3 versions of something done in a few days, where some people were still whiteboarding, trying to figure out the clever way to do it. I just write it wrong, and then write it a second time when I figured out how I'd written it wrong. And like, oh, geez, it's a performance bot. Let me do it with some cat. And I write it a third time. And by the time I'd written it about 3 times, it was as good or better than they were going to come up with on a whiteboard. So I wasn't the smartest engineer, but I was maybe one of the more prolific engineers. They could give me bullshit work too, and I would do it. I'd do anything. I worked on preview. I worked on, that nobody on the team wanted to work on preview. So give it to John. John will do it. Yeah. They gave me preview, and I worked on it, and then they liked it, and
Cool.
But go ahead.
I was just gonna say, winding up your time at Apple. Is that when you decided to get back into writing games, or did that come later? Or how did that?
Well, when I was looking at the games that I'd written, like when I was trying to collect them to make this sort of, collection of unfinished games, I could see that I had been writing games when I was at Apple too, but just not seriously. I mean, I kind of understood that I wasn't going to be able to publish them. That Apple told you that out front. They said outright, the minute you start working at Apple, every line of code you write, we own. Doesn't matter if you're at home or at work, we own it. So, but what I was able to do is if you came in and you had already written apps like Glider Pro, they said, well, you can maintain it. Yeah. Does maintain mean write a whole new version of it? It's great. Just don't ask, don't just beg forgiveness afterward, So I probably could have done Glider, or Glider Pro 2 or something like that. But instead, I was kind of into trying to write a graphical mud and stuff like that. So I wanted to learn how 3D works. So I'd write a little 3D program or something like that. But I knew I wasn't going to be able to publish them or anything like that. But I still wrote games just for fun. In fact, when the iPhone came out and people were just like, some of the dumbest games were just like making buku bucks, charging $1 a pop, but then you get 1 million people or so buying them. I thought, what the hell am I doing here at Apple? Mm-hmm. I stuck it out for about, 9 months or a year. And at some point I just told my manager, I said, I think I want to leave Apple so that I can write some apps. So I did. I left the Color Sync team and spent about 9 months writing apps for the iPhone. And they didn't make any money. I think In fact, I'd have made more money at a McDonald's, really, for the time I spent. But I think the gold rush was over. I think you had to be like, there was a very narrow window, and then it became a race to the bottom, and then all of a sudden the games were free.
Yeah.
When I was walking down the street in our neighborhood, and I was talking to a neighbor, and she was like in her 20s or something, and she's like, "Oh, you write I told her I wrote apps for the phone. She says, "Oh yeah, I never buy those. I just download the free ones." I'm like, "Wow, thanks." But so I came crawling back after about 9 months. I came crawling back, but I made sure that I didn't get on a Mac engineering team. I wanted to get on a phone engineering team. And I should say, I don't like the phone at all. I'm a huge Mac person, laptop, and but all the money and bonuses were going to the teams that worked on the phone. It's like if you were on a Mac, it was just like, you were nobody. So I thought, let me at least, if I go back to Apple, let me try to get on the iOS team. And I ended up working on iTunes U and iBooks, got onto those teams, and then just kind of went my own direction for my second stint at Apple.
Mm-hmm. And after all of that, are you planning on bringing out more games now that you're in the glory days of retirement?
I don't know.
Or maybe let's say republishing some of your old games in awesome packages. We know that that's happened already.
Well, I saw Crystal Quest on Steam, and I don't know if Patrick Buckland did it or somebody else. Just like Patrick blessed him to do a Steam version. But I thought, I should do something on Steam. Maybe I can make some money doing that. So I did Glypha 2 years ago, and I made about $400, but that paid for a Steam Deck. So I guess, So I just say, if I were to go back to writing games, it wouldn't be for the money, because there isn't any, unless you just get lucky, like Minecraft or something like that. But when I was introduced to Patrick Buckland on the phone because he lived in the UK when I was at Cassie & Green, because when the first Glider 4.0 came out, I was working on Glider 4.0 for Cassie & Green. Michael says, "Hey, Patrick's got this sound engine that he wrote, and it can do 4-channel digital sound. And you can set priorities to the sounds and everything, and it can handle up to 4 sounds simultaneously. And if all 4 sound channels are filled, it'll bump off ones that have lower priority." And I said, "Oh, that sounds like magic." And he says, "Yeah, why don't you talk to Patrick and see what kind of a deal you can work out with him?" And he said, Patrick's, so he's got a really strong accent. He's British, and he has a speech impediment. So it's going to be a challenge. So I ended up calling long distance to the UK and talking to Patrick, and it was challenging. Although I think we worked out something where he'd give me the compiled binary, but not the sources, and I paid him $1,000 or something like that. Which again, Cassie & Green just sort of, we'll take it out of your royalties. Take an advance of $1,000, give it to Patrick. Maybe it was $500. I don't remember, but it was, it was a nominal amount. He didn't give it to me, but it was something that in the long term was going to be worth it. So that was my only sort of passing chat with Patrick Buckland. But then he went on to do Carmageddon, which was like one of my favorite Mac games of that era.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
We used to play Carmageddon after work at Apple, the network, and that was just a blast. And Marathon, when that was a thing.
Oh yeah.
A little after, we had our little LAN parties essentially when it got rolling around about 5 o'clock, people would be like, "Hey, anybody up for Marathon?"
Yeah. And our friend Ryan actually brought that up back in the development talk of why picking the Mac. That's why Bungie picked Macintosh, is because it was a smaller pond. It was easy to be a big fish,
I think they were from Chicago as well, because a friend of mine drove up to Chicago to talk to him because he wanted to work for Bungie, because he was so enamored with Marathon and Shadow, or there are other games that they had done, and then they sent him packing. So I don't know how that went. This friend of mine. I mean, he was sort of he kind of knew computers, but he wasn't really an engineer, you know. So I don't know. But then of course they sold out to Microsoft when Microsoft had the Xbox coming out, needed a title. And they were at, I don't know if it was Macworld or the Apple WWDC. They showed, you know, a Halo running on the Mac, PowerPC. Yeah. And then next thing you heard, it was not going to be on the PowerPC. It was going to be on the Xbox. So. Traders all.
Yeah.
Oh, do you know the story that Dwayne Blim died?
No.
Very young.
No.
So I mentioned Dwayne Blim earlier. At some point, I mailed off like $10 because he'd send you a floppy disk with the sources. And here I am trying to learn how to write games like Dwayne Blim. This would be like somebody handing you, you know, the 10 Commandments, or I don't know. That's a bad analogy, but you know what I mean. The Holy Grail, whatever.
Yeah.
And I got a letter back, and it was from his mom, and she said that that Dwayne had died, and she didn't know. She's sending the check back, but thank you for, you know, for your offer, but you know, Dwayne died. Now that we have sort of the modern, like you can go to newspapers.com, I actually pulled up and found that he died in a motorcycle accident or something out in Ulysses. And around, I mean, that's why he did like 3 or so games and then just sort of disappeared. It's because he died in a motorcycle accident. But I didn't know that at the time. I just knew that I'd gotten a letter back from his mom saying, sorry, he's died. And then like a few years later, all of a sudden I got something in the mail where it said, hey, you'd sent a check years ago to Dwayne, and basically somebody had hooked up with his family, his family, and she had kept all these letters that people had sent. And they said, oh, I know what, I can take care of it, you know. And so somebody then was making copies of his sources and sending them out. And so I ended up, in fact, getting a floppy disk. At this point, though, it kind of like I'd already graduated and didn't need to learn how to use off-screen bitmaps and do sort of flicker-free animation and that sort of thing. But man, you know, so I got that, and I think the sources that are up on GitHub, I've provided those, gave them to somebody who put them up on GitHub or something. So if you look for Dwayne Blim's source code for Stuntcopter and Zero Gravity and all, and Cairo Shootout, those that came off my floppy. I think.
Oh wow, that's funny.
But, so yeah, that's kind of shitty.
Yeah.
It inspired me. So
well, on a better point or note, do you have any future projects in the works that you can tell us about?
Well, I mean, if you watch Blue Sky, I just do all kinds of stupid things. So whether it's 3D printing or building tube amps or painting, making balsa models and painting them. So I kind of, and woodworking, a lot of stuff in the garage and stuff. You know, I the programming stuff I do, it's like I've got a little TV app that it runs in Python, and it's got a schedule that it follows. And so it's essentially I've got a hard drive attached with, you know, a few thousand movies on it, television shows and that sort of thing, all ripped onto a hard drive. And except that it plays them in a schedule, not at random. So like at 3 o'clock, Leave It to Beaver comes on. At 3:30, like Speed Racer. At 4 o'clock, it's Ultraman. It's basically television when I was a kid, but without the shitty ones. Like there's no Gilligan's Island, there's no Laverne's Story, there's no commercials.
No Flying Nun.
No, I wasn't. I didn't dig the Flying Nun. I wasn't into it. I just got The Prisoner on there in the original Star Trek. Battlestar Galactica, and then a lot of movies. Like Wednesday is Western night, so at about 7 o'clock, some kind of Western comes on. On Monday, it's silent movies or musicals. Silent movies during the day, a musical in the evening. So yeah, I just do little personal projects that no one. I mean, I put them up on GitHub, but I don't think anybody would be interested in them. The only thing I did on GitHub that the most popular thing I did on GitHub was that little the little Macintosh. Have you seen this?
So cool. No.
So it's an e-ink display, and there's a Raspberry Pi. You can use a Pi Zero.
Yeah.
And the thing here is just a piece of acrylic that was laser cut, and then I bent it with a, what do they call those?
Hot, yeah.
The hot, thing. That, and then you can bend the thing. And so it's like supposed to be a calendar, and each day it refreshes, and then it'll show you like the phase of the moon. And it's the Atkinson div. There's a bunch of moons that I found, phases of the moon that I found on the internet. And then the scrapbook will give you the weather, and it scrapes it from one of the weather sites. Wow. And then I'll show like a random folder, and one day it might be, utilities, another day word processors or games. This happens to be games, and I see Staroids, PT-109, Crystal Quest, Enigma, Kid Picks, and Darts. So you don't know. I pulled the artwork from probably 100 games and dozens of other apps. Think Pascal and all that. And so every day you get something different like that. So yeah, the sources, it's in Python. I get the template for having this thing cut out of a laser. It's all up on GitHub, but it's the one that's gotten the most stars. I know GitHub. Yeah. You store.
Shut up and take my money. One. Oh,
it's called it's called System 6.
Oh, love it.
And and it's about, if I put it alongside a Mac Plus, it's about 2/3 the actual size.
It's beautiful.
It's just the size of the e-ink display I could find. It wasn't quite 512 by 342. It was a little bigger, but then I left some margin around to try to get it close.
But the e-ink is very close to the original screen, isn't it?
Yeah, it looks like it. And like this, even when it's unplugged, if you don't know this about e-ink displays, but even when it's unplugged with no power, it sort of freezes on whatever the last picture was. In fact, it looks like July 16th, 2022 was the last time this was powered on. I'm looking at the date on the scrapbook there.
Yeah.
But
that's cool.
Yeah. So yeah, I just do kind of dumb things like that since I'm retired. And I raised 3 girls, but every one of them's off. They went to college, and there's only one that's still in college. She's in Scotland right now, doing study abroad. So it's my wife and I don't go into work at the day anymore. So I just kind of work on dumb projects like this.
Yeah. That's so cool.
It's still great. I guess we're kind of getting to the end, and we'll take questions from people. So it's our new segment, which is the silly question. The silly question this week is, John, may I have your printed copy of the Glider source code book?
Wow. I think my kids want it.
I'm waving my arms around. This is just
I'm not sure, but you know what? I mean, this is an asshole reply, but I mean, the sources are up on GitHub. You can go to lulu.com and make your own.
Well, here's the problem. I've got a small creature in here that I just can't catch. And I figure that book from the right height is perfect for taking this thing out.
Yeah, well, that was part of it.
Or you've got a Bible cyst or something.
Well, when you spend like 6 months or whatever writing an app, it just feels, it's so virtual. It's ones and zeros. And so when I printed this out and saw how thick it was like, holy shit, that's like, Stephen King kind of thing. Like I could have written a great American novel. Instead, I wrote a game, but so it kind of gave it some substance, Yeah.
It's
kind of cool.
It's like that picture with the lady at NASA with all the source code.
Yeah, right.
But this version, it sent a paper airplane to the moon.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, out a window anyway.
Yeah.
So what questions do you have? I mean, if I ever come back on here again, I mean, there's some crazy stories about Apple, about Jeff Robin that I can,
You're invited. It's an open invitation. So,
yeah, absolutely.
Joe, are you scrolling up to some of these questions?
Yeah, I have 15 of them starred.
Okay.
Because I learned that we can do that and like tag them. So we can, so we don't have to scroll back through the list. So our very first question was from an hour and 45 minutes ago. No, but seriously, Mac84, who is a big time YouTuber, a repairer of classic Macs. He's Steve. He's one of our big friends. He asks, John, what was your favorite Mac model that you played with back in the day?
Mac model, like model of the Macintosh. When I got, I almost have to say the Mac Plus, but I got a Quadra. I don't remember what it was. It was a Quadra 700 or something. It was kind of fairly compact. It was kind of like the CI. It wasn't a very big case, but it was. I think it was one too where you could either set it on its side flat or you could put it on edge. And I don't know. I really love that machine. It was fast, but it also, and I think that might have been one that you could put a PowerPC card in. At some point, I had a machine that had been a 68K machine for a long time. And then when the PowerPC came out, you could get a PowerPC card for the new bus slot or something like that. And it was a machine that was capable of that. And so it became my first PowerPC machine as well. So that kind of made it sort of special.
Cool.
But again, I wish I remember which model Quadra. I'm kind of thinking 700, but
did it have a CD-ROM drive?
No.
700.
Okay, there you go. Yeah, something about CD-ROM. I remember when Myst came out and it required a CD-ROM. And I'm like thinking, I'm writing games at that time commercially. And I'm thinking, good luck with that, guys. Because I'm thinking, come on, how many people have CD-ROM drives? So I thought that's a great way to shoot yourself in the foot right out of the gate, is put out a game that requires a CD drive. But what I didn't understand, and this is why I'm stupid and poor and not smart and in marketing, is everybody that had a CD-ROM drive bought that game.
Yeah.
If for no other reason, bragging rights, But I mean, it was a great game. But I just thought, I would never write a game that required a CD-ROM drive when only a fraction of people had those. But there you go. Shows how much I know about marketing.
We had Graham Devine from Trilobite on recently, and I was like, was there pressure to push it down to one disc? And he was like, absolutely not. Like, the more discs the better, because then it was just like, it was for the wow factor of
who'd
how
have
big
thought?
your game was.
It's counterintuitive, I think. At least for me it is.
One Bit Fever Dreams is asking, or he says asking for a friend, which we know he means for himself. What's your go-to method in old 1-bit quick draw to get smooth full screen scrolling? Is it scroll rect with careful jumps or something else? Nerd. Anyway, somebody
when I was at KU, there was like one other guy that I knew that was programming games for the Mac. There's one other guy, and he shared with me an article from, and I tried to recently locate it. I think it was Mac Tutor magazine. There's a weird publication if you can find that. That was just kind of it was before Apple had Develop magazine. There was something called Mac Tutor.
Yeah.
And there was an article in one of the Mac Tutors on how to do smooth scrolling and flicker-free rendering of bitmaps. And that was where I learned how to create an off-screen bitmap, so that if you wanted to have a glider moving across a room, you could go and draw the part of the room that needed to be updated on an off-screen and draw the glider on it in a new position. And then when everything is composited off screen and ready to go, you just copy those parts to the screen, and in just one fell swoop, the glider has moved. Whereas the traditional way to do it would be, let me erase the glider and put the wall behind it, then draw the glider again, moved over 4 pixels. Well, if you don't sync it up just right, you're going to see a flicker. It's kind of like for just a fraction of a second or one refresh, it's gone. And then it's there again, moved over, and it would just sort of flicker. So it was expensive to do it this way, to do off-screen bitmaps, because memory wasn't cheap. And I mean, the machines didn't have a lot of memory on them, and every off-screen bitmap would eat up a huge chunk of RAM. So you couldn't go crazy. I mean, the screen itself was like 20K. And so if you had a full off-screen bitmap that represented the screen, there's another 20K. And if you had a background that's sort of like the unmarred, like what the room looks like when there's no animated things on it, that's another 20K. So you could end up real quickly eating up 60K, the screen, the compositing off screen, the untouched background, and then the sprites themselves would be on another. So, next thing you know, you're talking about a lot of memory. But for that trade-off of the memory that it would eat up, the glider would just appear to have just moved, and there was no flicker or tearing or anything like that. I suppose you could still get tearing if you did kind of sync it to the refresh, but that wasn't scroll rect. It was copy bits using using several off-screen bitmaps. One where you just composited everything to get it ready and then pop it to the screen. And you didn't copy the entire screen. That was just too slow on like a Mac Plus. You couldn't move 512 by 342 even 30 times a second, not using copy bits. So you'd say, well, the glider was here and it moved here. So you kind of figure out the sort of union of those two rectangles and say, well, we really only need to draw this piece because this will both cover up the old one and draw it in its new location without, you don't need to draw the floor and the ceiling and the staircase, nothing changed there. We can leave that the way it is. And that kind of would minimize how much drawing you had to do. But even then, I had a hard time getting to 60 frames. And, and it may have been a good thing that I was on such slow hardware where there was the 2SI, it was probably one of the slower color machines. And the Mac Plus is that, if I could get it to half-ass run on my machine, then I knew that everybody else would run fine on their machines as well.
Cool.
Wow.
Did you ever consider licensing Studio Session music format for your games?
Studio Session? No, I don't know. What is that?
One Bit Fever James says it's a software mixed 6-channel sound sample system.
Oh, no kidding. No, I didn't know about it. Like I said, all I knew was Patrick Buckland had written a kind of proprietary 4-channel one that he'd done. And I used that in Glider and probably Pararena as well. But I hadn't heard of the other one. Maybe it didn't exist back then. But also, again, no World Wide Web. So you're kind of limited on how you would find out about these things, You know somebody that's at the university that has a book called Mac Tutor and he's going to loan it to you. And it's like, that's what you kind of relied on.
That's how you do things. Yeah.
Or a guy that lives in Kansas that's going to, for $10, mail you a floppy disk with his source code on.
Our friend Ryan of Everything Is Broken Garage comes in with a joke question. How much was Walk Like an Egyptian up by the Bangles an influence on Glypha?
None at all. But I'm a huge fan of the Bangles, but only their first EP and their first album. After they kind of sold out, I'm not a huge Bangles fan. But no, Glypha was more kind of Cairo Shootout, but with Joust. It was Joust plus Cairo Shootout is really, so it was kind of an homage to Dwayne Glim's Cairo Shootout, I suppose. I mean, because Cairo Shootout was because there was a font called Cairo that shipped on the Mac that had all these hieroglyphics on it. And so it just as you could go into Mac Paint and you could switch the font to Cairo and you could type whatever character and get an Ankh symbol or a bird symbol that was, so it was like it became real easy to just kind of put together the artwork for Glypha just using the Cairo font, and then going in with your pixel editor and tweaking it a little bit. But it wasn't the Bangles.
Macintosh Librarian, who has an awesome YouTube channel, and her wonderful little Macintosh friend Mackie.
Yeah, I know, Katie.
She asks, did you ever consider making a big box release of Glypha 3 back in the 90s?
No, I was pretty sure that Atari would sue my ass off. So when Cassie and Green after Glider said, what else do you got? I said, well, frankly, Glyph is probably the most popular game I did, but it's Joust, So how about Pararena? So we did that, but I didn't touch. I didn't. I think too there was a certain amount of. There's a certain amount of pride that, like, if I just kind of ripped off Joust and published that, it just feels like cheating. I mean, I did Glypha Joust to intentionally challenge myself, because after I finished Glider, I felt like, did I just create a game around what I know how to do? Do you know what I'm saying? Versus like, so that I made, so whatever limitations are in the game, it's because it's because those were my limitations. Like, the game doesn't scroll because I didn't know how to scroll. The game doesn't, do this or that because I didn't know how to do this or that. So I played Joust a lot, like I said, at Godfather's Pizza. So I kind of knew sort of how the gameplay went. And so I thought, what if I try to take an existing game where I can't really cop out? And, I've got to have, in this case, the thing spawn from eggs into birds and, and do collision detection and that sort of thing. I couldn't really kind of cop out and say, I don't know how to do this. So that was, like the wraparound. Mm-hmm. How am I going to have the bird when he's on the edge of the screen and the other half of him shows up on the other side? It's like, I would have just didn't have to deal with that in Glider. You just, the room would kind of draw the next room, but it's like, oh shit, I'll have to draw it twice probably. I think, probably Joust, probably the hardware just handled it. If the sprite went off one screen, it'd probably wrap around just for free, but I had to draw the thing twice, so it's kind of like, I did Glypha to kind of challenge myself. But I never, but as far as, trying to publish it, that would have been embarrassing for me to say, yeah, I just copped another game and changed the artwork. And I have to say though, you pull down Glypha from Steam, that's more fun than Joust. I think it is. I've got a Joust machine that I got an emulator running on a Raspberry Pi, and I can play Joust. And God, that game is so slow. I just can't play that anymore. I don't know what I saw in it. Glyph is so much more fast paced that I think it's a more fun game. Yeah. No, I never thought of commercially. It just seemed. But every time I had to learn something new, like color, like when Casting Green said we need glider and color, I'm like, shit, I don't know how to do color. And they gave me an advance so I could go and buy a 2SI, but I still didn't know how to do color. So I thought, you know what? I'll take Glypha and I'll make a color version of it first, and I'll put that out as shareware. And then if I start getting like emails or mail saying this thing crashes on my Mac 2 or my blah, 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 then I'd wouldn't do that same mistake on the glider. So it became kind of a whipping boy for me, the kind of test bed where I would try new things on Glypha and then push those out. And then what I learned on Glypha, then I could apply to glider or whatever.
Mm-hmm. About color Glypha, I made that add-on pack for Glypha Vintage.
You ruined it. You ruined Glypha.
Oh no.
No, you did. I mean, originally when I did it for Steam, I'm just teasing you, but when I did it for Steam, I originally was doing it in color, and I just thought, you know what, this just doesn't seem right. And I thought,
it's super nostalgic in black and white.
It is. It looks. It's pixel doubled, so there's 2 pixels or 4 pixels for every 1 pixel that was in the original. So it's a little chunky. If you didn't pixel double, it wouldn't look right. It wouldn't look chunky. You want to have a little bit of chunkiness to it. But I just thought it looked better in black and white. And then I thought, because you say like the nostalgia factor. And then I thought, can I really put a game out on Steam that's in black and white? Fuck, why not? But I actually was going to do a rev to it where as you advanced in levels, maybe one piece would become color, like the eggs would be color if you made it to like level 5. And then by level 10, the enemies would be in color, and kind of bring the color in sort of slowly. I thought that would be kind of fun, but never did it.
One Bit Fever Dreams asks, what makes a classic Mac programmer resist 100% into going 100% into the more lucrative PC gaming world of the 90s?
Well, as I said, it wasn't like I wasn't doing it for the money, and I wasn't doing it. I mean, it's because I wasn't going to use a PC. You know, I was using a Mac. I was a Mac person, and you know, honestly, I think I've come around now to where I don't hate Microsoft or hate the PCs the way I did then.
Mm-hmm.
But then the PCs changed too quite a bit. I mean, if you remember Windows back then, it was horrible.
Yeah.
And by the way, when you hear Bill Gates say that his famous quote about, well, you know, Steve and I, Jobs, both just robbed the same. You know, we had a rich neighbor and we both stole. You know, that being
the same TV.
Or Xerox. It's like, no, that's not really true. Apple saw the what they were doing at Xerox PARC, and then didn't really quite understand how it worked, and ended up doing something better. And then Windows ripped that off.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
At least that's the way I see it. I see it that Apple.
Yeah, we all saw that.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, indirectly, sure, but Apple did a lot.
He was just justifying himself. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, you try to make that point though, and it's either lost on people or somebody thinks you're just nitpicking. It's like, no, I think it's a big deal, because there were a lot of challenges that they ran into, like, you know, to have this notion of selecting an object and then performing an action on it, rather than being in a mode where I'm in bold mode and then I type and then I have to turn off bold mode to type normally. It's like, no. You just type, and then if you want to select text and then hit bold, you're acting on, you know, that was kind of a novel thing. To be fair though, I think Xerox had that kind of idea too. But you know, there were a lot of edge cases and things that Apple had to solve that I don't think Xerox ever did, because they didn't have an actual shipping machine. And again, Apple found solutions for these things, and then Microsoft just copied those solutions that Apple had found.
And Apple gave Xerox stock. You know, they paid them for the inspiration. It wasn't just like we took this.
Yeah.
So, I mean.
Yeah, and honestly, you know, it likely wasn't going to see the light of day if Apple hadn't have done that. So
no, it
would have taken a lot longer, I think, before that would have seen the light of day.
Yep. Sloopy Malibu asks, do you think that games drove mass computer adoption in the 1980s?
Yeah, you hear porn did, right? Whether it's VHS tapes, right. Or whether it's VHS tapes or, you know, BBSs, there'd be GIFs that you download and that sort of thing. But no, I think it was games. I mean, it was games from the first Apple II. You know, I mean, it was, like I said, you know, it certainly was for me. You know, when I saw Super Trek on the TRS-80, or when I saw the Elite, or I mean, that it was games that, you know. Yeah, I guess at the same time, though, I mean, honestly, what else were you going to do with a machine back then if you weren't, you know, running a spreadsheet or something like that? I mean, now, of course, with the internet, there's all kinds of things that I do that are non-game related on a computer, but there's a lot less back then. I mean, again, too, when the Mac came along, you had kind of art type stuff. There was desktop publishing. People that were into music, MIDI, and that kind of thing came along. They were using the computer so eventually the computer started having lots of things that were non-game related that you could do with them. But you know, definitely when you go back to the 8-bit, it seems like that was the big draw with the games.
Oh yeah.
Everything Broken Garage asks, have you recapped your Mac Plus yet?
Twice. Well, I actually recapped it back in the like 90s, when it was maybe not even 10 years old or something. And I had the thing die on me, and I found out it was the analog board that had gone out. And at that time, again, back in the back ad section of Macworld or something, maybe somebody have some little ad, and it was like selling a capping kit. And you'd send off, you know, $20, $30. They'd send you a bag of capacitors, and they were all the right values that you needed. And so when I opened this thing up and looked at the analog board, there were some caps that were domed. I mean, they were like convex. I'm like, well, I know that's not right. So I ended up recapping it, and then it sat for like 20 some years or something. And a few years ago, I tried to start it up again, you know, and I got some kind of zebra pattern on the display. And I think before that there was the chimes of death and Sad Mac, and I took note of the code and the sound that chimes made, and it might have been memory or something. So I ended up doing a bunch of swapping of RAM until I got past that. But then I would get this weird kind of zebra pattern on the display, and then I was watching somebody's repair videos online. I don't know if it was Adrian's Digital Basement or one of you guys' repair videos, but somebody had gone through and reflowed the solder on the part that mounts to the motherboard that takes all the power and everything. It's like one big Molex connector that has all the, and they said, oh yeah, you just have to reflow the solder. And then I thought, well, what the hell, why not? That's an easy fix. So I opened it up again. I reflowed the solder, powered it on, and it was great. So I had it on probably 3 or 4 months ago, and it works like a champ. But it's been recapped and reflowed. The solder's been reflowed. It's the only thing I think is, I don't think the floppy's working. So if I can get the floppy that's working.
Because those have capacitors inside them as well.
Yeah.
It just never ends. Yeah.
Cool. Repair everything, make it work again.
Yes.
Sean Fahey has like 3 related questions, and I'm going to combine them together. He's asking if you ever attended Resource Central or Apple Fest in Kansas City at Avila.
No,
or maybe
I haven't.
the A2 Central conference, or did you ever attend A-Bug?
A-Bug? No. No, I did not. I went to, I think the only conferences I've been to was when I was out in the Bay Area in California. There was the Vintage Computer Festival West. And then there were a long stretch of years where they didn't have it for some reason. But then they started having them again, and that was kind of fun. You'd see Kim One computers and that was kind of fun to go to the Vintage Computer Festival. Yeah, no, I'll try to get to the Kansas Fest or something like that this year.
Yeah. Yes,
I believe
please.
you have an open invitation to.
Yes,
you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
I just found this too. Do you know what that is?
No.
Oh, oh wow. No.
It's a
like
Mygent pocket modem.
Yeah.
In fact, you can put a 9-volt battery in there.
When you started moving it, I thought it was one of those like backpack SCSI drives for like the toughs.
This was my modem when I was connecting to BBSs back in Kansas in 1988. I just love this little Mygent. It was bright red. That's the coolest looking industrial design instead of those boring Hayes modems that,
Cool.
Now we got Fujinet.
Yeah.
Yes. Macintosh librarian asks, how did you get your start at Apple, which I think you already discussed. And then she asked, did you ever work at Apple Park? I think she means the new Apple.
Yeah, the new campus. I worked there. I didn't have an office in Apple Park towards the end. I mean, we had the whole COVID thing, right? And everybody was working from home right around the time that Apple Park was kind of opening up. And and they kept telling us like, oh, everybody's going to be in Apple Park. And then it was like, no, there's not room for everybody. And so you're going to stay in one of these, far-flung offices, buildings outside the Apple Park. But some people on the team, like the management or something, I think they had an office. So I'd sometimes go into Apple Park and there'd be an empty office that you could use because the so-and-so wasn't there. And so I just sit down with my laptop, connect to the internal Wi-Fi and code. So I worked a little bit at Apple Park. I didn't really care for it. To me, I always tell people it's like a big fucking museum, but there's no artwork hanging on it. So it's a fancy building. It's all beautiful, but it's like, where's the art? It's like just empty. That's what it felt like. Now, a guy I worked with, I won't say his name because it might embarrass him, but he was one of the engineers that walked right into the glass and split his nose open and they had an ambulance come and take him off. I mean, he wasn't hurt that bad, but Apple was just, being cautious and
Yeah.
sending an ambulance and everything. And he wasn't the only engineer. I think there were a couple engineers that walked into the glass when it was brand new and they were just moving into it. And if you go there now, there's these little dots that are just sort of every few inches along the glass. And I've heard that they call those Johnny's tears. Reference to Johnny Ives.
Yeah.
He regrettingly had them put these little dots so that people would hopefully see the glass and not walk into it. Some of the offices are just glass all the way around. And so what'll happen is you'll be talking to somebody and then you'll just turn and start to walk. And you didn't know your back is you're 6 inches from the glass. So then you just turn to walk and you just walk, bam, right into the wall. So, yeah, I could share photos of the inside of the place if at some point.
Ooh, inside baseball. Yeah.
Yeah.
And Sean Fahey has our last question, unless anybody pops more questions, but we are getting a little long in the episode today. Which was more difficult to program, Glider or Pararina?
Probably Glider, just because if you go to Glider 4, because there was just a lot more going on. Well, I'll tell you what, the editor, the house editor in Glider, that was a real pain in the ass. That was harder than the game because you had to make sure that people couldn't do stupid things. Like, you'd take just to give you a real stupid example. Let's say you have a toaster on a table. There'd be a little thing you could drag to say how high the toaster jumps. Well, now they set the height of the toast. Now they go and move the glider up on a higher shelf, and that thing is clipped now. It's off. It's through the ceiling. So I have to write all these kind of special case code, like, if you move this object, if it's a toaster, I have to check the height. And if that height plus where the toaster's position is goes outside the bounds, I've got to clip that. So, I mean, it's kind of like you have to put all these kind of sanity checks all through the code so that, somebody has a reasonable house when they're done, that the toast doesn't go flying through the ceiling. So it's kind of that sort of tedium that made that just kind of a real pain in the ass. But, Pararina was kind of straightforward. So definitely Glider, but mainly because of the house editor.
Did you ever meet either of the Steves or Johnny or Tim Apple? What he means is Tim
Apple. Yeah. Oh God.
I used to take home hardware that was being thrown into the bins at Apple. At some point, the Apple started locking up the sort of recycling bins, and you couldn't pull machines out. But there was a time when you could walk by and there'd be big blue bins in the hallway, and you look into the bin, and sometimes there'd be prototype Macs. Sometimes the Mac would be like in plexiglass or something. It would be this, look like somebody's science project with circuit boards and this and that. And so I'd pull one of these things out and take it home. And then I would turn it into a MAME machine or digital picture frame or something like that. I just do kind of little hobby things with Macs that they were otherwise going to throw out. Yeah. And I built a MAME machine and I brought it into work and I put it on a cart and I was rolling it down a hallway to bring to somebody's office to show them or something. And Steve Jobs was walking down the hallway, the only person in the hallway walking towards me. And I thought, oh shit, he's going to see this and say, what the fuck is that? And then I'm going to have to explain, I made a MAME machine. What are you bringing it into work for? And on and on. But he just walked by. So, hey, that was it. I mean, I was in rooms where town hall meetings where he spoke, but I wasn't chatting with him. And I was in a room where they were preparing for a WWDC and there was a problem with some colors. And so they called one of the color sync engineers in, and there was a whole room that was sort of the room where they had on all whiteboards on all sides of the room. And they were scripting out how the whole keynote was going to go. And there were whole sections, and Phil Schiller was in there and, was kind of managing things and says, oh, come over here, the color sync guy, come over here. These colors are fucked up, blah, 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 blah. So, I was in a room with Phil Schiller. I'll tell you the story about Steve Jobs, the town hall meeting that I went to. When they did Aqua, for System 10 or Mac OS 10, when they did Aqua, it was kept real under wraps for a long time. I mean, even internally, there were some engineers and, marketing designers, I suppose, that were coming up with this. And I'm sure, Ali Ozer and some of the team that are part of Next Step or the UI were totally in on it. But most of us that worked on preview or whatnot had no idea that they were doing this new UI, this Aqua. So at some point, though, they needed to push it out to everyone to make sure that all our stuff looked good in Aqua. I worked on monitor the display preferences and preview and stuff. So I wanted to make sure that, that the toolbar and all this stuff looked good. And so they had a town hall meeting, and all the engineers that were going to now be introduced to Aqua would be brought in. And then there's going to be this secret thing. We're going to show you this thing, but you can't talk about it because then we want to surprise everybody at WWDC or whatever. So Steve Jobs is down, and he's going to show the history of user interface. And he starts with the command line interface. He's got a whole, slide presentation and that sort of thing. And he gets to the Macintosh, and there's cheers. We brought the graphical user interface, And he gets to the next step and shows the next machine, and somebody boos. And he just stops, and he looks out, and he said, "Who said that?" And there's like dead silence. We're all sitting there like shrinking in our seats, like, oh shit, man, who the fuck said that? Man, it wasn't me. And he says, "Who said that? Who booed it next?" Silence. And he said, "Fuck you. Whoever said that, fuck you, that OS, that user interface." And he went on this tirade. I'm just like, geez, wow. Then he threw it off, went right back to his, not keynote. The keynote hadn't come out yet, but right back to his prezzo, and then goes and says, "Here's Aqua. It's lickable," and we got to see that. But I was just like, wow, this is an uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I want to be in the room.
Yeah. I was going to say your hallway interaction with him is probably the ideal interaction with Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
Like
everything I hear.
I don't even want you to acknowledge I'm here. Thank you.
I'd see Jeff Robin walking with him and chatting with him, having lunch with him all the time. Jeff probably tell you all kinds of stories if Jeff were willing to tell stories about him. So I'm sure he was a fine guy. If you kind of knew him, were on the right side. Yeah, I was happy not to have any interactions with him at all. That was fine. He'd have seen right through me too. He'd have seen I was a faker. I was faking it.
It's fine. He was faking a lot of it too. It's okay.
Yeah. I was gonna say that was kind of his brand.
Well, see, that's just it. A faker can spot another one. So.
Yeah. So I think we've gotten through all of our questions from the audience. So that's been awesome. This has been a great talk.
Yeah, this was really great.
Been super fun to have you on, John.
Yeah.
Do we want to proceed with the rest of our show, or do we want to cut it short, Ron? Because it's at 2 hours.
I would say we can. We'll save that because. Again, we could talk about that anytime. So
yeah. Cool, awesome. Well, I think that we're going to call the show done for the evening. Again, I would like to thank you wholeheartedly, John, for agreeing to come on tonight. This has been amazing. An excellent talk. And some inside baseball, so to speak, about the history of many things in our wonderful, both our hobby and our industry. So thank you very much, sir.
Well, no, thanks. But, I do feel like I sort of skirted around the edges. I like I said, never
all the more reason to have you back.
Never had
we need you back.
Jobs or anything like that. But just so like you, I guess I was an observer, and I didn't take very good notes, and I don't have a great memory, but I don't know. I am older, so I can probably reflect on some of the earlier stuff though. So you're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Absolutely. So where can people find you online, follow you, see what you're doing, so they can catch up with what's been going on with you?
The only thing I do socially is probably Blue Sky, and it's engineers need art. I don't know where I got that idea from. But so engineers need art. I didn't go with Soft Dorothy or I mean, I use my real name. I use John Calhoun. I use my real name on Hacker News and pretty much any social site. I use my real name. But like the GitHub is Engineers Need Art, and Blue Sky, it's Engineers Need Art. So yeah, that's all. And pretty much all I do is just post what stupid project I happen to be working on. You know, I try to stay out of politics and things like that. Not that I don't have political feelings. I just feel like, you know, there's enough people kind of dealing with that, you know, and even that I agree with, but I just, you know, try to keep just like, here's some project I'm working on and maybe it'll inspire somebody. So
cool.
Absolutely.
Awesome sauce. Javier, where can people find you, sir?
That's it. AB Stuff is my main right now, and of course ABTs, my t-shirt store. But I got a lot of new things in AB Stuff that I'll talk about that later, because you know John is more important and more interesting.
Ron.
You can find me here on the first and third Sunday of each month when I'm not getting my hair cut at the same place that Garth Beagle does. And then past that, it's ronscompvids.com.
Yep.
Joe.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe with Joe's Computer Museum and the ostensibly host of this show when Ron isn't planning it, which is about 0.2% of the time. Thank you, Ron, for all your hard work and helping plan and bring on cool guests like John. You can find me at jcm-1.com, where you can, you know, follow all my social media stuff. It's all linked there, and you know, get the occasional little tool to help keep your old computer working, like a Blue SCSI, for example. So yeah. Oh, it's are you selling candles now, Javier?
We're gonna be selling Mag candles. I love the Mag now.
Hey, you know, if this candle is not on there, if you don't put that candle on your site.
Mag.
Alrighty. Awesome sauce. Well, thank you everybody for a great show. Thank you everybody who stopped by to watch and listen to John speak about computer and game history. Remember to hit like, hit subscribe, do all that magic stuff. And we will see you again very, very soon.
I just wanted to apologize. I haven't read all those comments. I'll try to read them, though, afterwards.
Okay.
Sure.
Goodbye, everybody.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye. Have a good evening, everybody.